Heavenly sunlight. Walking in sunlight all of my journey, over the mountains, through the deep vale. Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee, promise divine that never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine. Shadows around me, shadows above me, never conceal my Savior and guide. He is the light, in him is no darkness, ever I'm walking close to his side. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine. In the bright sunlight, ever rejoicing, pressing my mansions above, singing his praises, gladly I'm walking in sunlight above. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine. 283. 283. We sing the first and the third verse. Jesus, keep me near the cross. There's a precious fountain, free to all, a healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, O Lamb of God, bring its sins before me. Help me walk from day to day with its shadow o'er me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Terry, would you have open prayer, please?
Our Father who art in heaven, we come before you with thanksgiving for blessing us with another day, the gifts of life. And we thank you for this time of assembly that we can reflect upon the love of Christ Jesus and the great sacrifice that he made through the shedding of his blood for the forgiveness of sins. We can have the hope of eternal life and call upon you as our Heavenly Father. We ask you to bless our assembly this day. May the things that we do bring praise and glory to your name. As we go through the class, may we learn the things that will build us up and encourage us, that we will be stronger and more faithful Christians in your service. And it's again, we ask your blessings upon
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great that we can all be here for Bible class. I know we're all happy and excited about this morning's class. We're in Genesis chapter 45. And today will be our last day in the book of Genesis. After this, there will be another class to begin. So we're getting done with this study. And as you know, I'm always excited whenever we wrap up a study, because that's when all of the things we've been learning about seem to kind of fit together. And as well, we get to start something new, and that's always exciting. So we're excited to be finishing up this study and to be culminating all the things we've been learning. We've made a large trip through the book of Genesis. It is sometimes a difficult book to study because of its length and because of how much is really in there. The majority of the book of Genesis is narrative, and especially the last 25 chapters. That's why we've been moving quite fast through the last 25 chapters. If you were to look at how much time we spent on chapters 1 through 15, it doesn't even compare with how much time we've spent on each chapter after 25. So we're going to be looking at the last 5 chapters of Genesis this morning. And specifically, we're going to be looking at Joseph, Israel, and his family being brought into Egypt. And we're going to close out the book of Genesis with a coffin in Egypt. And an interesting little fact about that. So, chapter 45, we actually read the first couple of verses of chapter 45 last week. We're not going to read 5 chapters this morning. We're not going to look at every verse. There is quite a bit of chapters 45 through 50 where it is the listing of names. There's quite a bit of these chapters where it's just giving the storyline of what happened. And I would encourage you to read chapters 45 through 50, every sentence, every word. It's something that's not that hard to read. I actually read it again this morning before class. It took probably less than 5 minutes. So it's a short read, good read, and for that matter, it's good to have a little bit of time every day just to spend reading. It isn't that hard to read 10, 15 verses. If that's all we can read today and all we can apply and have that much time, that's a good cereal reading while you're eating your cereal in the morning. But chapter 45 specifically, we're going to be seeing a big turning point in one man's life. That man, of course, is Jacob, is Israel. He was renamed Israel. And Jacob is going to find out some information that he did not know. Does anybody remember what Jacob thought, what Israel thought, happened to Joseph?
Thought he was eaten by a wild animal, didn't he?
Thought he was eaten by a wild animal. His brothers, you might remember, brought this coat of many colors, this special robe, this special coat that his father had given to Joseph that had been dipped in the blood of animals. And then gave it to the father, Jacob, Israel. And Jacob, Israel, deduced exactly what they intended for him to deduce, that he had been torn apart, ripped apart by wild animals when he had been sent on a journey to see his brothers. His brothers weren't very happy with him because he'd had these visions of his father, his mother, and even them all bowing down to him. Something that would be fulfilled and has been fulfilled in the recent chapters we've been looking at. But so Jacob, Israel, believes his son to be dead. Now what's so special about Joseph? What makes Joseph and his brother, for that matter, also set apart? What makes them special?
They were of the wife that he loved.
They were of the wife he loved. If you remember the story of Jacob, we studied this a little while back, he had 2 wives. It wasn't his choice to have 2 wives, you might say. Everything's a choice, but this was somewhat manipulated to him. He was promised Rachel if he worked for so many years for her father, Laban, his uncle. And he worked for so many years for Laban, his uncle, and was given Leah, the older sister. And Laban claimed that, well, we had to give the older sister in marriage, for he give the younger sister in marriage. And that is true, that was a custom of the time, but that's not what Jacob understood to be happening. He was deceived. So he said, I wanted Rachel. So he worked for another period of time and earned Rachel. So he had Leah and Rachel, the two wives, but he favored Rachel. That was the one that he was really in love with. However, Leah ended up giving him much more children. Rachel was not able to have children, yet God blessed her twice with children. So the oldest son of the favored wife, one of the two, Jacob believes to be dead. Israel has lost this son. And he's been coping with this. He's had to deal with it. It's made him very protective of the other brother. He didn't want to send the other brother to Egypt when they had come back from seeing who they would later find out was Joseph, the Pharaoh's right-hand man to buy grain. And Joseph had requested, bring back the other brother, so I'll know that you're not lying. It seems to all be a ruse to get to see his younger brother and to see their commitment to him so he could test them. So after them bringing back the younger brother, he did test them. He put his cup in that younger brother's bag. And after sending them off with their grain, he sent his people after him, the Egyptians after him. And they caught up them and said, which one of you took the cup? Knowing full and well which bag it was in. Opening the bags, they had already said, whoever you find the cup, whoever's bag it is, let him be put to death. He'll be your servant. We'll all be your servant. Nobody took anything. Come to find out, the bag was in the cup was in the youngest brother's bag. So at this time, they all get brought back, and remember, Joseph is testing them to see if there's been any change, if they have had any change of heart. He's not going to remove the other son, the other favored son of the favored wife, the youngest here brother. And he's so heart-wrenched by what takes place. They are truly sorry for what they have done. And they are not going to let it happen again. They refuse to let it happen. They offer up their own children, their own families, their own selves in this place. After seeing this dramatic change in how much love they had for one another and how much love they had for their father, Joseph couldn't contain himself anymore, and he revealed himself to them. He cried so loud that even Pharaoh's household and Pharaoh himself heard him crying. That's a pretty loud amount of crying. So at this time, we're caught up with where we have looked at before, and we see that Joseph is going to be bringing his whole family into Egypt. But what this is going to involve is these sons going back to their father and admitting what they've done. Telling him that Joseph's alive, we deceived you, we tricked you. He's not really dead. One interesting point here, and I don't want to go too far into it because we're going to be there in just a minute. All this time, Israel, Jacob, he believed Joseph to be dead. I don't say this to be degrading, but was Jacob stupid? Was he unintelligent? Was he dumb? Was he unobservant? No. All the evidence pointed to the fact that Joseph was dead. But it wasn't true. Jacob believed a lie. It wasn't his fault. He was led to the wrong conclusions. But with the information he had, he did the best he could. That's interesting. That's something we're going to explore a little bit more in a moment. So here, Joseph, after revealing himself to his brothers, tells them to not be distressed, not to be angry with themselves, because they sold me here. They sold him there, for God had sent him there. Don't be distressed that you sold me, because God wanted me to be here. This was all God's plan. He repeats this same idea in chapter 50 later on. After their father has died, the brothers become somewhat scared that Joseph's now going to exact revenge on them. That now that their father's passed away, he's not worried about making his father sad from killing all of them. So now he's going to come back and get vengeance. So they come to Joseph, send a message saying, before our father died, he said you should forgive us. Now we don't have any record of him saying that, and it's probable that they are just saying this now to appeal to their father so that they will appeal to the good name of their father and his remembrance of their father for him to forgive them. But Joseph, once again, reiterates this same idea. You sent me here for evil, but God put me here for good. God intended this for good, and He saved Israel. We're talking about the nation now. He saved Jacob and his sons, the future generations that would come. All of them were saved, and Joseph having to endure that and having to suffer that. It's also an interesting commentary on our suffering. It's hard for us to go through things sometimes. Sometimes we wonder, why is God letting me suffer? Why isn't God taking away this pain? Why did God allow this to happen? When I was young, our family experienced a house fire. It was a traumatic event. I wasn't really that young. I was probably around 12 or 13. But it was somewhat traumatic, having everything you had gone. Completely relying on others' kindness because you had nothing. Why in the world would we go through something like that? Why would God allow that to happen? He hasn't told me, He hasn't revealed anything that's writing on the wall that He did in times past, but perhaps it was for the betterment of someone else. Perhaps it was for the betterment of us. Perhaps by us going to live in a different area, we were able to affect people and it would be better for us. I might not be the person I am today if it wasn't for the things I had suffered before. The people that I got to interact with and have an impact on perhaps wouldn't be the people they are today if it wasn't for those things taking place. Jacob and his sons, Israel and his sons, would not be the people they became. They would not have been saved from this famine if Joseph hadn't had to endure being a slave, being thrown into a prison, being wronged by Potiphar's wife. If he hadn't had to endure all those things, where would Israel be today? Israel wouldn't be today. Wouldn't be any Israel. The Bible would end in Genesis chapter 40. So, there's a lot that can come of evil. There's a lot of good that can come from bad situations. God has a great way of having that work out. So instead of next time wondering, why am I having to endure? Why am I having to suffer? Perhaps we should turn that around. God must have something really good in store for somebody. God must have something really good planned to bless somebody out of this. It's the only explanation. Think of how much good can come out of this. And when we start thinking in that way, then we allow for those good things to happen. Joseph could have said, oh, you're going to get it now. I'm in charge in Egypt. You can't have any grain. My father can come live. My favored brother, the brother that's of my same mother, he can come live with us, but you go starve. He could have done that, couldn't he? It would have been well within his right as the right-hand man of Pharaoh. In fact, Pharaoh probably could have had them thrown in prison and punished. After all, Joseph's in a pretty high place right now. Whatever he wished, he pretty well got. But that's not what he did. He saw the situation. He saw how God was using this bad time for good. So in our lives, let's consider that. Let's consider the next time we're in a bad situation. Perhaps this happened, and I'm in this bad situation, and I can use this for good. Perhaps God can use this for good. Perhaps I can find a positive twist on this. Now, he does tell them, in verse 9 of chapter 45, he says, hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. And he has them all there to be a witness to his father because his father believes Joseph is dead. So what's it going to mean when they come to him with a message from Joseph? It would probably greatly distress him, but he wouldn't believe it. Not unless all of those sons had been there and seen. Verse 12, and now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. Not only do the other brothers have this witness to bear, that yes, they have seen Joseph, but his own brother, the same mother, Benjamin, the next favorite son, he's seen that yes, this is Joseph, and he can go back and tell. Not only that, but they can tell of what kind of situation that he is in. Verse 13, you must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here. So after weeping, after being happy, tears of sadness, tears of happiness, they go down. Now what's interesting is to see what Pharaoh says. Pharaoh heard about this, and it pleased Pharaoh and his servants, And he told Joseph to say to his brothers, "Load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me. I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land." He's supposed to take wagons from the land of Egypt for the little ones and for the wives and bring his father and to come. He said not to even worry about your goods. Don't even bring your possessions. Don't pack up before you leave. Just come on. You're going to have the best of all the land of Egypt. He gave them some provisions, gave them some donkeys laden with food and things they would need, gave them wagons to haul their children in, and whatever things they could not leave behind. So they departed. And notice in verse 24 what advice you might say, that Joseph gives them, command that he tells them. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, "Do not quarrel on the way." Well, apart from brothers being brothers, what might they have to quarrel about? I told you we should have never done that in the first place. Joseph's alive, and now he's in charge in Egypt. He's just being nice to us, so our father's here. Might have caused them to tarry. We're not told exactly what they might have quarreled about, but that is interesting that he gave them that charge, not to quarrel on the way. So they went up out of Egypt, they came to Canaan, they came to Jacob, and they told him, verse 26, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. Jacob believed a lie. Even when he was confronted with the truth, he believed a lie. Now remember, these wagons have come from Egypt. These donkeys with all of these provisions. Before, when they had come back from Egypt, they had their money replaced in their bags. There was ample evidence to prove to Jacob, to prove to Israel, that Joseph was in Egypt, that he was alive. But he didn't believe. We need to be very lenient and very understanding of those that are confronted with truth and don't believe. Even if they have ample evidence. Because sometimes it can be very hard to believe the truth. You notice what it said there, his heart became numb. His heart became hard. His heart, even though he saw what was there, he could not believe it. It's as easy to believe a lie as it is to believe the truth. The moment we forget that, it will be very difficult for us to convince anybody of the truth. It's also something to help use to others. This would be an important passage to remember back. Some people that would, when you're studying with them or when you're talking with them about something, you say, "Well, no, if I was wrong, I would know." Are we better than Jacob? Better than Israel? Are we better than them that we would know if we had believed a lie? This shows it's obviously just as easy. It's no harm of Jacob's. He had been given false information. Israel had been deceived. Sometimes people believe something that's not true because they were given bad information. I'm sure it's happened to each and every one of us. We were told something by someone, and perhaps they didn't even mean to lie to us. Here, the brothers had meant to lie to their father. They meant to deceive him. But perhaps they just had bad information. Perhaps the person that told you didn't mean to lie to you. That is something that can help convince someone to re-examine what they believe. Because the moment you say you're wrong, they get defensive. They put up that wall. Their heart becomes numb. Here, like Jacob's did. The moment he heard Joseph's alive, he put up a wall. He has already dealt with the fact that his son's dead. He cannot believe it. Well, we do need to be very careful and very understanding. That does not change the truth. It did not change the fact that Joseph was alive. But it took some convincing. Verse 27, "But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw their wagons that Joseph had seen to carry him, the spirit of their father, Jacob, revived. And Israel said, 'It is enough. Jacob, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'" So eventually, after he sees the wagons, after he hears all the things they've said, all the truth finally settles in, he believes. So there is always a possibility. Just because you talk to someone and they say, "I don't believe you," doesn't mean that later down the line they won't. That they won't give in to the truth, to what's there. Some of the most stubborn people in the world that are so hard set on what they believe can make some of the most radical changes and can be the most productive converts. Because when you see you're so much of error, and you make that big turnaround, it makes you all much more eager to go the other way. Perfect example is Saul. If someone had said to the early church, Saul, this man who was persecuting the early church, he's going to end up being a Christian, I'm sure they would have laughed. In fact, many of them still didn't want to believe after he had converted. After he changed up, they thought he was just pulling a trick. So here, Joseph has sent for his father. They took the journey with all they had. They came and they offered sacrifices to the God of his father and Isaac at Beersheba. And God spoke to Israel. This is chapter 46 and verse 2. And God spoke to Israel, to Jacob, in visions by the night. And he said, Jacob, Jacob. And Jacob replied to him, Here am I. He said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I'll make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So he's had this secondary confirmation from God as well, that God's going with him. Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They took their livestock and their goods as well, that they gained in the land of Canaan. They came to Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring. Then if you look from there on down to the end of the chapter, it gives a list of the different sons through the different wives that he had had. And then towards the end of the chapter, verse 26 gives the total number of the counted people that went out from Jacob's family is 66 persons. You'll notice also there in verse 27, the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2, and all the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So be aware of those two numbers there, 66 and 70. Perhaps it's due to the fact that that's adding in the wives that were not numbered in verse 26. It could also be numbering Joseph and his wife and the 2 sons that he has. There are multiple explanations there. We're not given the exact one that it is. But it does allow for that. Verse 28, he said he had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him into Goshen. They came to Goshen, and Joseph went out to meet his father. He presented himself to him. He fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household, who are in the land of Canaan, have come to me. Now he instructs them to tell them that they are shepherds. Why? Because shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians. So they get to dwell in this land of Goshen, this good land. And they'll even get to be shepherds of Pharaoh's flocks, some of them. So he brings some of his brothers in before Pharaoh, and they testify to the fact that they're shepherds, and that allows them to have this good land. And Pharaoh has them dwell in that land, has them to settle and to be in charge of his livestock. That's in verse 6 of chapter 47. Then Pharaoh speaks to Jacob, to Israel. Verse 9, Jacob said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's already just asked, how long has he been alive? And Jacob answered, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. So they all got possessions there in the land. They're living in the land of Goshen in the area of Ramses. So everything is going well. They have provided for, he has provided for his family. Then we're given some information from verses 13 all the way down to the end of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter, of the things that Joseph accomplished while he was governing over Egypt. He had laid up in store in Pharaoh's storehouses a large amount of grain during all the years of plenty, so that now during the land of famine, the people of Egypt would not starve. They could come to Pharaoh and they could buy grain. Now because they bought grain, Pharaoh prospered. He got all the money in the land of Egypt. Then he got all the cattle in the land of Egypt. Then he got all the land in the land of Egypt. And Joseph works out a deal with all the Egyptians. A fifth of everything is going to go to Pharaoh. And the rest of it, of all their produce, is left for them to replant, for them to take care of their kids. And that was even up to the time of the writing of this book, the book of Genesis, that was still taking place. that a fifth still went to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh has prospered quite a lot through Joseph governing for him. Verse 26 is where it listed, it still stands to this day, that Pharaoh has a fifth. Only one people were exempt from this. The priests were given an allotment. Now these aren't the priests according to the law. These aren't the priests of God. These would be the priests of Egypt, the priests of the gods of Egypt. And they were given a certain allotment by Pharaoh, so they didn't have to sell their land. But apart from that, Pharaoh owns everything. He's prospered pretty well under Joseph. He likes him quite a bit. In verse 28, we see the winding down of Jacob in his life. He lived 147 years. When it came close to the time he died, he ends up blessing his sons. Something that was very common to do, and something that was a big part and a big favored part of a person's life, being blessed by the father, by the patriarch of the family. First, we're going to read in chapter 48 about the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Now, Jacob has afforded Joseph a great honor. Joseph's first two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are going to become Jacob's sons, according to the blessings, according to inheritance. They're going to have an allotment in the land of Canaan. And any sons that Joseph has after that are going to be his own. Now we might think, why in the world would he do that? But they get a blessing. They're getting to have an opportunity to take part in the inheritance along with the rest of the brothers. That is a huge honor. And also it's going to be of great worth to them.
When you're saying inheritance, you know, that this is why the 12 tribes of Israel does not contain Joseph.
That is true, and that's an important thing to point out. And we'll notice when we get on into Exodus or in another study, and we'll also notice in chapter 49 when he blesses his 12 sons, that those are not the 12 tribes you read about. What we will notice is the 12 tribal allotments, and the point there being when there's 13, you might say tribes at that time, is that Levi became a tribe of priests, and they did not have an allotment in the land. So that's how you still wind up with 12. They were given certain cities to dwell in so that they could minister to all of Israel. So, Ephraim and Manasseh, they have an inheritance along with the brothers. That is why you don't see Joseph as one of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why you don't see Joseph as one of the land allotments. That's a great blessing, something you can be very proud of. Something interesting takes place in chapter 48. Jacob does not bless them traditionally. Traditionally, the right hand was the good hand, the favored hand. So when he goes to bless Ephraim and Manasseh, he crosses his hands. Joseph lines them up, the older in his left hand next to the right hand of Jacob, and his younger in his right hand next to the left hand of Jacob. So he has them here, and Jacob extends his hands and crosses over. Joseph attempts to move the hand and say, no, you're supposed to be having the right hand on the older. And Jacob said, I know what I'm doing. The younger one is going to be over the older one. Ephraim is going to be greater than Manasseh. And that's pointed out here in verse 15. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. Let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Verse 17, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. He took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. And Joseph said to his father, not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So we have Ephraim and Manasseh, these two that are often mentioned in the tribe of Israel. Remember that they are the sons of Joseph, and they were given an allotment along with the other sons because of the great service that Joseph has done to the family, to the nation of Israel. And then as you look through chapter 49, you'll see the different blessings that are placed upon the different sons of Jacob. Some important ones to point out. Reuben, beginning in verse 3, it's there in verse 3 and 4. He points out the fact that he had taken one of his father's concubines and how that he was unstable as water. He won't have preeminence because he went up to his father's bed and defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi also is an interesting one to point out at the end of verse 4 there. They, if you remember, at the defiling of their sister Dinah, convinced the entire city to circumcise themselves, and then they would give their sister Dinah to them. And then when they were in the pains of their circumcision on the third day, they went and killed the entire city. And so they there are said that their anger killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it's fierce, and their wrath, for it's cruel. Verse 7. He will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And it is interesting that Levi ends up becoming the priest, and he's not all in one land allotment, that he's spread out. Judah is another one of interest to point out. In verse 8, Judah goes all the way down from 8 to 12. And this is an important verse. If you highlight or mark in your Bible, you may want to mark verses 10, 11, and 12. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garment in wine, and his vestitures in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. So that's another one, important one to point out and to have remembered, that it was already predicted beforehand. And in this blessing, he's telling them all what's going to happen in the future, what their life is going to be like. He's blessing them for the future. He brings up how Zebulun is going to be over next to the shore, and so on and so forth. Now, Joseph is blessed in verses 22 down to 26. And Benjamin, finally, is the last one to be blessed. It's interesting to see the different blessings that are given there, and I encourage you to read through them and to see how they apply to the different tribes and possibilities. But those are the big ones that we wanted to point out. We want to make sure that were mentioned.
One about Judah, sometimes they use that as a prediction of Christ coming out of Judah because of this particular thing.
Yes, and that's why this verses 10, 11, and 12 are so important, and with Judah. Because Judah, the lion of the tribe of Judah, describing the Christ, the Messiah, was something they understood way beforehand. They looked to Judah to have this lineage of kings. What tribe was Saul, King Saul, of? Benjamin. Another very important tribe. You may remember that Benjamin is one of the smaller tribes, and so it was odd, here verse 27, that it was odd that he would become a king. Yet he was also a son of the favored wife. Yet Judah, who was of the tribe of Judah? King David. So it's interesting to have the Saul and David both of coming from Benjamin and then from Judah. It's of that lineage of David that we have that line of kings. So that lineage of David we have Solomon produced, and that we'd eventually have Jesus of Nazareth. It's interesting also to look into the lineage, the genealogies of Mary and Joseph as they're recorded in Matthew chapter 1 and also in Luke chapter 3, I believe. So the lineages there do become very important. And there is a special importance placed on Judah. There's interesting predictions made about Levi there, and that is very important to recognize them. In verses 28 through 33, we have the death of Jacob recorded after he blesses his son, and he commanded them and made them promise that he would be buried in the cave in the field of Ephraim the Hittite that he had purchased, or that had been purchased by his fathers for a burial place. And they have this cave to be buried in. His wife Leah was buried there, and if you remember, that is where he wanted to be buried. And he will be. In the beginning of chapter 50, after Jacob is embalmed, and the time of embalming, 40 days that is required for that, is done, Egypt wept for an additional amount of time. I think it was 70 days. Yeah, verse 3 of chapter 50. Then he requests of Pharaoh, let me go out and bury my father in this land that he has purchased. There's a cave on a field, and the field belongs to his fathers there. Let me go and bury him. I promised him I would. He doesn't go alone. The elders of Egypt go with him. His sons go with him. The only people of his family that were left were the children. It's amazing to see this huge pomp, this great crowd that goes along with them to be buried there. It's also interesting to see the fact that the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, when they had stopped at the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, when they were lamenting and they made great grievous lamentation, the Canaanites saw them. They said, wow, this is a field where the Egyptians are really sad. And they named the place after that. Verse 12 said his sons did for him as he had commanded them. So they have him buried there. And that is when we, as we discussed before, the brothers come back to Joseph and they say, now our father said for you to forgive us. And he reiterates that fact, verse 19, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? For at you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. He comforted them and spoke kindly to them through those words. Joseph remained in Egypt. He and his father's house both. He lived to 110 years old. And he saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. He lived a long, happy life. And he also, children of Manasseh were counted as well as Joseph's own. Another great honor to have there. Now, an important thing here to note, and it's going to close our study of Genesis, is the fact that Joseph also made them promise. He recognized what had been promised to his father and his father's father and his father's father's father before them. Verse 25, he said, he made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. He believed what God had said. And his fathers had passed that down from person to person, that they would not dwell in Egypt forever. They'd be coming back out. And Joseph said, bring my bones with you. And the book of Genesis closes with a coffin in Egypt. Verse 26, so Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Now the story doesn't end there. Going on into Exodus, we see that coffin in Egypt being brought out. We see it make all of its way to the land of Canaan. And then Joshua brings those bones across the Jordan River and across over into Canaan. It's an amazing journey that coffin makes. That concludes our study of Genesis. Are there any closing remarks or questions as we close it out here and close out the class this morning? Thank you so much for your participation and your cooperation, and I hope it was helpful.